encouraging better conversations about medicines between patients and healthcare professionals. And finally, I would like to say that I'm really, really grateful, and our colleagues in NHS are really grateful for everyone outside the NHS who is helping with this, and particularly the College of Medicine and their Beyond Pills campaign. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will try and do two things at once, which is to change the presentation while also not wasting into the 8 minutes. It's obviously purgatory if you work in social research to only have 8 minutes to talk about the research base. Sorry,
Do you want me to swap you over?
if you could, I'm sorry, this is
No, it's not.
the technology is letting me down. Thank you very much. Yep, that's fine. I'll just stick that to the front. It's quite a short presentation. And so what I wanted to do today, and it's a delight to have the chance to do this, because often when we do research in support of government policy making, it tends to get hidden within the engine room. So it's a real honour as well as a delight to be here today to run you through some of what we found when asked to provide some input to the National Overprescribing Review. Again, although this is social research, I've cut out 83 slides on our method. I'll just say we were dealing with patients generally with serious and long-term conditions. The method we were using was, in the jargon, semi-structured depth interviews and focus groups, was essentially just getting people to talk. And it was qualitative. So this isn't about giving you percentages. We can't tell you what proportion of people think one thing or another, but the people we talked to were selected to be broadly representative of the Great British public when we take account of the fact that we're also particularly looking for people who had long-term conditions or were on multiple medication. And so we had about 150 hours of contact time with people on this. As I said, I'm going to get it down to about 3 minutes. So the three areas that we'll pick out just to sort of kick off the discussion, we maybe have questions later. The first stage is a consultation, and what we were looking at here was where the nature of the expectations that the public and patients were bringing to this interaction. So people saw that they had a responsibility themselves, that they were there, they had a duty to sort of assist the GP, provide information, but their experience was also a variation, a very wide variation in the response that they would get from GPs and their natural reaction. These are almost professional patients, but people who go, right, this is a big part of my life, I really want to make this work for me. They would find a good GP and they would always try and go back to them. But this thing about the role that what people are bringing, and again, I think this is a really key thing that we found, because when you're thinking about initiatives, and particularly to encourage people to behave in one way, people are very, very different in all sorts of ways. So we found that some people were much more ready to take what the doctor told them to do, the healthcare professional told them to do. Other might have more confrontations, if you like, more assertiveness. And when we just give you a flavour of that kind of who is in charge in that relationship between patients and doctors, if we think of it sort of the power side of it, just these are just a very few quotes just to give a bit of a flavour of that came out of the groups. So I won't run through them all, but perhaps the one at the bottom right is a typical one, people changing their views, that they had previously gone, yeah, if the GP says this, I'll just do it. But when they felt responsible for someone else, then they took a much more assertive role to go, I want to be absolutely sure that my children's getting the care that they need. But the others, I mean, they're taken to be representative of the kind of views that came up. So these are all things that many people expressed. We've just taken a couple of examples to give a flavour of how they expressed that. So one of the things, this question about that relationship between patients and healthcare professionals and how that is evolving and how different people are looking for different things from it. Second thing we were really wanting to look at was diagnosis. So where we asked people what's the ideal doctor, it was about doctors who listened to them, who gave them some choice and options, talked them through each of those, and finally, crucially, made sure that the patient was going away informed. It wasn't just delivering information, it was also giving them the chance to say, you know, have you got that? Would you like me to write it down? and that might include even asking someone to come along with the patient just to make sure that was understood, and people later could recall what they'd been told and hadn't gone into that sort of, which I'm sure we've all had that kind of moment of where it's all just too much to absorb. Definitely a feeling amongst the people we spoke to that most of the time GPs were doing what they should have been doing. Yes, some fell short of that, and it was generally about interpersonal skills. But there was also some pushback about routine explaining side effects. And again, the felt time pressure was there. So when we asked people, how would you advise other patients, a fascinating thing about almost sort of checklist that Joe public could take into the GP surgery to the consultation to get the most out of it, and that was including preparing questions in advance and so on. And again, just a flavour of some of the issues that come up. Again, just to take there's one on the left. This is both. Actually, it was a conversation. So one person from London, well, they how can they know what it all does? They'll just look it up. But they're sort of, well, that's fine. So long as we know where we are. So people are perhaps, particularly people who are using the health service a lot, they do become more assertive. They do have higher expectation, but they can also be quite humorous as well as quite realistic about what might be on offer. There's a third thing we looked at, the sort of theme coming out, was this advice to a fictional patient through the treatment process. Yes, you need to be active, almost managing your own case, and also you needed to be informed, you needed to ask questions and the rest of it. And I think where people were coming forward and saying this, there was always a question, what about those who cannot play that role? They don't have the capability to be an active and informed patient, and that, I think, even when we were talking to people who were, they immediately felt that is a risk, that is a worry for people who aren't in that situation, who don't have that kind of capacity. And also this question about trial and error. And again, it was one of those things where if it was explained to patients, they were much more ready to accept it. It's where they were going back and not understanding that something was not a definite cure, but maybe it would contribute. And again, a lot of it came back to the time that patients had with the doctors and whether they had come away understanding what the process they were going through involved. So the treatment side, although Tony's absolutely right, patients definitely recognised medicines could be brilliant, they could be life-changing, they felt dependent on them, but then equally not always that people particularly wanted to. And I think the burden of long-term heavy use of medicine, the dependence on medicine, really came through strongly. And I think that sense in which this process, the Overclock Review, was trying to help people who are carrying this very heavy burden on top of their illness, on top of their condition. So, we have two sides when we think about patient experience, just to move into the sort of where our sort of analysis fed in. We can think of the process side of it, that the process of going through a path of treatment is often complex, confusing, opaque, disjointed, out of control. So this is what people felt about the process, but also there was this emotional dimension that was so important, that people could be going in to see healthcare professionals scared, angry, alone, tired, and of course in pain. So just at the time when you needed to be on the top of your game to deal with the process side of it, was exactly when you were being undermined by all these emotions that are coming directly from the medicine and also from the implications, directly from the condition and also from the implications of that condition. What would it mean for somebody in the future? What would it mean perhaps for their family as well? So a lot of fear could be tied up in that. Just to kind of wrap up, two thoughts where we would be just thinking about taking this a little bit further. So one is almost a way in which one could try and think about 4 dimensions in which patients interact with this process. Top of them, the most important, they want to be heard. They want that process of listening, they want eye contact, they want the social cues that show that they are being paid attention to. Yes, they want to be valued and they want to be understood as well. And there is a little bit of a subtlety in there, and if time allowed we could dig a bit more into that. And then they also want to be informed. There's a question there about, is it always information, and where does trust come in? That sometimes, because of the challenges of all of this, people actually do want to hand responsibility back to the doctor. So that sense of shared decision making, absolutely the right principle, but sometimes the GP may just need to take some of that burden back because the patient themselves doesn't feel that they can adequately play their part in that. And then one thing that we touched on, which unfortunately we didn't in the research manage to take as far as we want for various reasons, but I love the idea that one day we will be asked to do this, was to think about the nature of the personality of healthcare providers, almost the placebo effect of the trust that you place in these characters. So we did a little bit of this, which was talking about the stereotypes that the patients would recognise. There they all are. But actually, when you started to ask people about, well, what is the ideal doctor, and using things that would be common and familiar, even the dinosaurs, there would be people who would say, here is Sir Lancelot Spratt. Well, actually, someone who just comes in is enormously confident about the fact that they're going to cure you probably does a lot of people a lot of good, even if it's absolutely not what the modern medical profession is looking to provide. So again, that's something where if somebody out there suddenly found they had some end-of-year research budget, they wanted to try something rather interesting. This is how people think about their GPs in a way. They're thinking about in the abstract, and it helps them to make that connection between those abstract qualities and what does that mean in practice. What do you actually want from your GP? And I think one of the things that comes out of that, when we did talk about it, people came up with very, very different ones, but they did like lots of different things. So there isn't one model for the GP, one model for a healthcare professional. Patients are looking for lots of different things and can respect lots of different outcomes. I think I've used my 8 minutes, but hopefully there'll be some questions, but I'll leave you with that road gathering.
Well, what a fantastic, where do I get rid of these slides? So, Sam, can you do that? Yeah, fantastic. So my name's Henrietta Hughes, and I'm the Patient Safety Commissioner for England. And I was just really interested in the stereotypes because I am a GP and I did come in a white coat, so clearly I got the message. So I want to talk about a very sort of different approach and my role, which is about the safety of medicines and medical devices, and to promote the safety of medicines and medical devices, but also to promote the value of listening to the views and experience of patients and the public. My role came about also as a recommendation from a national review by Baroness Julia Cumberledge, First Do No Harm. And I just remind you of her findings in that review, where groups of patients, mainly women, had had terrible experiences, not only about medicines that they'd taken that had harmed their children, but also from pelvic mesh surgery that had left them in pain, unable to have relationships, often losing their jobs, losing their mobility, their homes. And these 3 groups of patients were looked after by gynecologists, by urologists, neurologists, by GPs and psychiatrists. And so it's not about a tribal aspect in terms of different groups of doctors and their personalities, but some certain themes arose. And the first one was that the patients didn't have the information that they needed to be able to make a decision about their care. The information wasn't there, or it wasn't shared with them. They weren't able to raise concerns when something went wrong. They were dismissed. They were treated to degrading experiences in some situations. And the system response was disjointed, it was siloed, it was slow, and it lacked compassion. And that may have been the response of their individual doctor, it may have been the response of the organisation where they had their care, but it was also the response of the whole health sector, the regulators, the politicians, the policymakers, and the providers. So Baroness Cumberledge made a recommendation for a patient safety commissioner, somebody who would be able to tie these disparate threads together and look at the safety of medicines and medical devices and how we can incorporate the views and the voices of our patients and service users into the design and delivery of healthcare in England. So I started this new role in September. September, as you may recall, was a fairly busy time in the political landscape. Between being nominated and appointed, there were 4 Secretaries of State for Health, 2 chairs of the Select Committee, 3 Prime Ministers, and we also had the national mourning period. But undaunted, I am on a cultural journey with the Department of Health and Social Care, who've never had an independent commissioner role before. And just to put it into context, when somebody said to me, what was the first thing that came across your desk? I said, I don't have a desk. I still don't have a desk, I don't have a website, but we're working on it, And what I've been doing in these past few months is I've been listening hard to patients, I've been listening to their experiences, and I've been taking on board what they've been saying and what they've been doing. My focus is on 3 areas of priority, and I'll tell you a little bit about those. The first one is around the culture in the health sector. You've heard already from our eminent speakers here this evening that patients want to be heard, but the quality of listening in the health sector at the moment is poor. Just to put it into context, both the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England don't have any patient representatives on their boards. They don't hear a patient story at board. But NHS England has recently gone out to a consultancy to help improve their reputation so that they're not so disjointed from the front line. I'm a frontline GP myself, and I think the easiest way to avoid groupthink, to get credibility, and also to remove that disjointedness from the front line is to listen to patients and hear what they're telling you. You know, and it's actually should be just normal business as usual activity. If I just turn to culture, we heard a bit about consent, about people getting the information they need to make a decision about their care. And I had the great privilege to meet Nadine Montgomery, whose landmark case, Montgomery versus Lanarkshire in 2015, really set a new direction of how we should be contextualizing decisions that patients are making. And it's not us who are making the decisions. Even shared decision making suggests that the doctor is the one who's making the decision with the patient. I think we should be talking about supported decision making. And for everyone who's making a decision, they will be at a different level of health literacy and a different level of confidence as to whether they want to take part in that decision or how much they want the doctor to support them in it. But when we look at, for example, the way that people are on waiting lists at the moment, 7+ million on a waiting list, it's a terrible statistic. People are being brought in after 18 months on a waiting list, and they're then being told you're going to have this procedure. But do we know if it's the right procedure for them? Is it still the right procedure for them? How much time do people have to be able to contemplate and think about it and know that it's in the right context for their lifestyle? The next thing I'm interested in is about conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest abound in the health service, and people who are having treatment with surgery, with medical devices, they want to know who's paying the doctor. So I'm working with the Department of Health and NHS England and others to try and help move forward away from everyone to declare their conflicts. And I think that's the right thing to do if you're in any other role in charity or a non-exec director of a trust. That's just normal business as usual. The next thing is around pelvic mesh. So around 100,000 women had treatment called a TBT for stress urinary incontinence. Were they given the alternatives of having pelvic floor physiotherapy? Well, pelvic floor physiotherapy is now more available, but they weren't. They weren't told about the benefits, the risks, the alternative treatments, and the option of doing nothing. And we don't know, because there's no registry to say how many people have had mesh and how many have had complications. But the estimate is around 1 in 10. So 10,000 women who've been affected by this, and some men who've had pelvic organ prolapse as well. I'm working with groups of patients to understand what they need. And what they need is for their GPs to understand when they come into the practice that this could be a mesh complication and what then to do, what investigations are the right ones to do, where to refer in the new national mesh centres. I'm also working with NHS England and others around the registries programme and making sure that the patient voice is included in that. We don't want to say, oh, whoops, we forgot the patient again, because the whole point of the Combledge review was to get the patient voice right in from day one. And that's what makes the difference. That's how we get it better for everyone. But I understand also about the invisible patients. Who are the patients that we're not hearing from? How can we reach them? How can we hear them? How can we incorporate their views? And I heard about a really fantastic programme of some demonstrator sites where they're working with very vulnerable communities, and by listening to them and incorporating their views, making improvements for their care. The other things that which I think are really important for sodium valproate is that you may not be aware that this is a drug which is very effective for epilepsy, for bipolar disease, and for some other conditions such as migraines. But it's extremely harmful in pregnancy, and many steps have been taken, including in 2018 the Pregnancy Prevention Programme, to make sure that women are not taking sodium valproate in pregnancy. But the shocking fact is that around 20,000 children have been affected by this. This is a scandal much bigger than thalidomide. These children who've got physical malformations and who've got a 4 in 10 chance of having a learning disability if they're exposed to sodium valproate during pregnancy. But 3 babies a month on average are still being born after exposure to sodium valproate, which is a shocking fact to me. So I've been working with GP leaders, with pharmacists, with the MHRA, with NHS England, CQ, I mean, every part of the system says, yes, something must be done. But don't come to me to provide the solution. And I have to say, I find it very disheartening and disappointing, because I would be wanting everyone to be leaning in and doing everything they can. So I will continue on this, and my acronym that I work to is PUSH. I will persist until something happens, because that's what you have to do. And when it comes to the hundreds of patients who've contacted me with other conditions, I would love to be able to support them. But my team is really small. I think it says a lot about the culture in the Department of Health and Social Care that my team was set up with 4 people. When you think that the Victims Commission and the Children's Commissioners have got substantially larger teams, I would hope that there are more patients than victims or children in this country. So where do we go from here? What I would like to see, and I'm sure we would all like to see, is that if you're the patient, you're the most important person in the room. You're the most important person in the clinic, you're the most important person when the district nurse comes to visit you. That the people who look after you know how to listen. They're genuinely interested in what is the matter with you, but also what matters to you. They are able to offer you a range of different options: medical, non-medical, social prescribing, biopsychosocial. I mean, a lot of us are GPs in the room today, and we all know about patients' concerns, their ideas, and their expectations. When we think about the whole person, we think about the physical, the psychological, and the social elements. But what's it going to take to get there? Well, what I would like to see is that the national bodies really up their game, that they are listening directly to patients, that their board members are doing that. Now, I've invited, when I've sitting a GP in the practice, I've had the chairs of NHS England, NHS Improvement, and CQC sitting in with me, and that was really important because they saw it for how it is. And I'm of the opinion that the visits which are bare below the elbow with the tie tucked in, kind of swooping around an A&E department, are less valuable than putting on a set of scrubs and spending some time with the hospital porter. I genuinely believe you've got to see it with the patients. So what would I like to see? I'd like to see a much better listening culture. I'd like to see patients' views and voices automatically being included. There are some green shoots in this. In the trusts, we've got patient safety partners being appointed. I've heard about a system whereby pharmacy labels can be translated into multiple different languages, which helps with the health inequalities. But I'm really also hoping that the issues that I've talked about sodium valproate and mesh, are going to get to a conclusion, so that I will then have capacity to be, looking after a lot of wider problems that people are bringing to me. So thank you very much.
Which I'm going to try and get through at breakneck speed. So I'm Laura, I'm a GP in Brighton, and I set up a practice about 10 years ago, very inspired by Bromley by Bow, and recently wrote a book called What Seems to Be the Problem. This is the sort of emblem of our practice, which was done by one of our artists, and it's supposed to represent all the different little worlds of all the patients and how unique they are, done with like a fun print. So I thought I'd just quickly go through a potted history of general practice. So general practice, I think, as we all know, started off where GPs would just private contractors, you'd have paid your GP in whatever turnip